There is no steeple, no parking lot, no sign out front, no address you could type into your phone. And yet somewhere, in a farmhouse, this Sunday, roughly 150 people are about to spend the next 3 hours in what is, for that morning, the busiest church you will never be able to find on your own. This is an Amish church service, and almost everything you think you know about what happens inside one is either incomplete or flat wrong. To understand it, it helps to follow someone who has actually been let in. Donald Craybill has spent close to 50 years studying Amish communities up close, sitting through services, interviewing bishops, and writing what's still considered the deepest outside account of how this all works. He'll be our way in. Because the first thing that trips people up isn't the theology, it's the building. There isn't one. The Amish don't construct churches. No architect, no mortgage, no building fund. Every district, a cluster of 25 to 35 families, takes turns hosting. Every other Sunday, church happens inside somebody's home, or their barn, or sometimes a shop cleared out for the morning. You find out where by watching for a wagon. It's a long, flat farm wagon that does one job. It hauls backless wooden benches from house to house, family to family, week after week, for as long as that district has existed. When it pulls into a farm's lane on a Saturday, the neighbours don't need a text message. They already know. Tomorrow, this house is church. And it's only every other Sunday, which surprises people too. The off week isn't a day off from faith. Families spend it visiting relatives in the next district over, or sitting quietly at home reading scripture together, or driving a buggy over to check on an aunt who can't get out much anymore. The rotation exists partly because one minister, unpaid and still running his own farm, can only realistically preach every second week without the whole operation falling apart. So the calendar bends around the man doing the work for free, not the other way around. The night before, the family hosting doesn't just tidy up. Walls come down. In a lot of homes built by Amish carpenters, the ground floor has sliding or removable partitions built in for exactly this. So a kitchen and 2 front rooms can become one long open hall by Sunday morning. Furniture gets moved into the barn. Rugs come up off the floor. Somebody is out in the yard past dark, sweeping the drive smooth for buggy wheels, and inside, the smell of the meal that will be served tomorrow is already sitting in the kitchen. Bread rising, coffee ground and measured out for 150 cups nobody has counted yet. By the time the first buggy turns in the next morning, wheels crunching slow up the gravel, harnesses jingling, a line of black shapes rolling in one after another until the lane looks more like a parking lot than a farm drive, the house has quietly stopped being a house and started being a sanctuary. With none of the fixtures you'd expect in one, no altar, no pulpit, no stained glass, no cross on the wall, no candles, no organ in the corner, just rows of benches facing each other in a room that was somebody's living room 12 hours earlier. Here's the thing that catches most people off guard though. There's no pastor showing up in a robe with a sermon he's rehearsed all week. Amish ministers aren't hired, they're not trained at a seminary, and they're not paid a salary. A minister is chosen from inside the district itself, by lot, meaning a group of respected men is nominated by the members and then one of them is picked, essentially, by drawing a marked slip from a stack of hymn books. Whoever draws it serves for life, unpaid, and he keeps farming the next morning like nothing happened, because being called to preach doesn't excuse anyone from the work. You start to notice a pattern here. Every layer of this strips something out that you'd assume was mandatory. No building fund, no clergy salary, no sign-up sheet. Nothing here was designed by a committee trying to grow attendance or build a brand, and yet the same district has been meeting unbroken for generations. And it keeps going, because the next thing that happens is the singing, and it will completely reset your idea of what a hymn is. There's no band, no piano, no guitar, nothing plugged in or strummed. Just the whole congregation, together, unaccompanied, singing directly out of a book called The Ausbund. It was first printed in 1564, written largely by Anabaptist prisoners while they were locked up for the exact faith being practiced in that living room 5 centuries later. The tunes were never written down. They pass from one generation's memory into the next, sung so slowly and drawn out that a single hymn can eat 20 minutes, long enough that in some districts the ministers actually leave the room mid-hymn to go into another part of the house and quietly decide who preaches that day and in what order, then walk back in right as the song is finishing. Picture sitting through that. No screen with the lyrics glowing on it, no worship leader counting you in. Just a room full of people, some of them barely old enough to talk, holding a note that stretches out for what feels like a full breath and a half. The wood floor creaking under the weight of 150 people, rocking slightly in time because their grandparents held that same note the same way, and so did theirs. And this is a good place to notice something you'll keep bumping into all morning. There's no program handed out at the door. No bulletin telling you what happens next, no clock on the wall to check. You just have to know. The way you know the words to a song you grew up hearing because you were raised inside it. Underneath almost every one of these decisions sits something called the Ordnung, and it's worth pausing on because it's not what it sounds like from the outside. It's not a rule book handed down from a bishop's office, and it's not written in a binder anywhere. It's an unwritten, agreed-upon understanding specific to that district, covering everything from how wide a hat brim should be to whether a phone is allowed in the barn but not the house. It gets reviewed out loud twice a year at a members-only meeting before communion, where every baptized adult in the room gets a say before anything changes. No single person can rewrite it. The bishop leads, but the district has to actually agree, out loud, together, or nothing moves. That's the part people miss when they picture some elder handing down commandments. It's closer to a town meeting that happens to run on faith instead of a zoning board. From here, the service moves into preaching, and it runs long. The whole thing typically lasts about 3 hours, delivered almost entirely in Pennsylvania Dutch, with scripture read aloud in High German, a language most of the congregation doesn't speak day to day, but has heard read from that same book their whole lives. Kids sit through the entire thing beside their parents. No separate children's service, no side room with juice and colouring pages. A toddler might doze off against a mother's arm. A boy of 6 might get a quiet look from his father for fidgeting on the hard bench, but nobody gets pulled out of the room. Teenagers and unmarried young people sit apart, grouped by gender, in a section of their own, which is often the only part of the morning where you can actually watch the next generation sizing each other up while trying to look like they're paying attention to the sermon. Somewhere in the middle of all this, the congregation kneels, together on a bare wood floor for a long, silent prayer, with no one leading it aloud. You can hear the room breathing, a chair leg scraping somewhere near the back, a baby fussing and then going quiet against a shoulder. And there's a detail from inside one of these services, recorded by researchers who were finally let in as guests, that says more about this whole world than almost anything else. As the room turned to kneel, the host, an elderly man whose home it was that week, quietly got up and pulled the barn door shut. Afterward, someone asked him why. He said it was because Jesus taught them to pray in private, in a room already full of 150 of his closest neighbors. That's worth sitting with for a second. Even inside the most communal moment imaginable, there's still an instinct to close the door on it. Twice a year, that same kneeling posture carries even more weight. During communion, when the district also observes foot washing, members pair off, kneel again, and wash each other's feet the way it's described happening at the Last Supper, ministers included, no one exempted by rank. It's one of the only moments in the whole calendar where the community physically kneels in front of one another instead of just alongside one another. And it's reserved for members who are fully at peace with the rest of the district, because communion is called off entirely if there's unresolved conflict between anyone in the room. The service simply doesn't happen until it's settled. Now, before we get to the part of this that actually explains why anyone would sign up for 3 hours of standing, kneeling, and singing in a language they don't speak day to day, there's something worth mentioning if you like this kind of deep dive into how communities like this actually run. I put together a field guide called the Amish Almanac that walks through the calendar side of this world, the church Sundays, the barn raisings, the seasonal rhythms that most videos never have time to get into. The link's in the description if you want the full version. There's also a QR code on screen if you'd rather scan it. Alright, back to the service. Because none of this, the bench wagon, the 3-hour sermon, the hymn from a book written by prisoners, is something a person is simply born into and stuck with forever. Every one of these young men and women sitting in that separated section, watching each other across the aisle, is heading toward a decision nobody makes for them. It usually arrives during their late teens, a stretch of freedom the Amish call Rumspringa, where a lot of the normal restrictions loosen, and some young people genuinely go find out what the outside world looks like, cars and phones and all. It isn't a loophole or a rebellion phase invented for outsiders to gawk at. It's the community's own way of making sure the vow that comes next actually means something. Because baptism has to be chosen by an adult who has seen the alternative, not inherited by a child who never had one. And here's the part almost nobody outside this world understands. And it's the actual reason all of it holds together. When someone does choose baptism into an Amish church, they're not just agreeing to dress a certain way or give up a car. They're entering something closer to a lifetime insurance policy that was never called that and never sold as one. There's no health insurance premium in this world, no mortgage default, no nursing home bill that bankrupts a family, no fundraiser online when the barn burns down or a father gets hurt in the field. The district itself absorbs it. When a family faces a catastrophic medical bill, the church takes up a collection and pays it, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars, without a second thought about whether that family can pay it back. When a barn burns, the whole community shows up and rebuilds it, often inside a single day. Neighbours driving nails from sunup to sundown, with no invoice at the end of it. When someone gets old and can't farm anymore, they don't move into assisted living. They move in with family, or family moves in around them. And the district makes sure nobody ages alone and nobody dies broke. It's the closest thing to a cradle-to-grave safety net that exists anywhere in America, and it costs nothing to join beyond the vow itself. That's the trade. 3 hours on a backless bench every other Sunday. A language most of them don't use anywhere else. A hymn book written by people who died for singing it. And in exchange, an entire community that will never let you fall through the cracks. Because falling through the cracks isn't something this system was built to allow. Once the sermon and prayers finally close, the benches don't get folded up and put away. They get flipped, and the same boards that 150 people just knelt in front of become tables. Within minutes, that same room fills with bread, pickles, coffee, church spread, all served up assembly line style, first to the ministers and older members, then everyone else. Kids sneaking extra cookies off the end of the table while their mothers pretend not to notice. Outside, the men who spent 3 hours in stiff black coats loosen up fast, standing around in the yard, talking crops and weather and whose turn it is to host next, while the horses that pulled everyone in stand tied along the fence line, swishing flies, waiting for the ride home. It's the part of the morning that looks the most like any other family gathering anywhere. Except every single person in that yard just spent the last 3 hours agreeing, without a vote or a show of hands, to keep doing this exact thing for another 2 weeks, and then the 2 weeks after that, for as long as they live in this district. The wagon that hauled the benches in on Saturday will be back for them Monday, already booked for 2 Sundays from now at somebody else's farm. And this same living room will go back to being nothing more than a living room by Monday afternoon. To an English neighbour, which is what the Amish call anyone outside their faith, all of this can look like a closed door. No visitors' welcome table, no website inviting the public in, no way to just show up out of curiosity, the way you could walk into almost any church in America on a Sunday morning. And in a narrow sense, that's true. This isn't built to be found by strangers. But talk to the researchers who have actually spent time inside a district, and a different picture shows up. One where the same neighbours who won't advertise a service will show up with a casserole the day someone's barn burns down, or send a team of hands over when an English farmer down the road breaks his leg during harvest. The distance isn't coldness. It's just a community that has never needed to perform its own goodwill for an outside audience. Because there was never an outside audience it was trying to convince. So no, there's no steeple standing over any of it, no sign, no website, no address you could search for. Just a wagon, a rotation, and a room that gets rebuilt into a sanctuary and then unbuilt back into somebody's kitchen, week after week, for as long as anyone in that district can remember. The whole thing runs on people showing up for each other, not on a building reminding them to. Was it worth it? Giving up the version of church most of us grew up picturing, for 3 hours on a hard bench, and a community that will never let you go broke or grow old alone? 150 people showed up again this morning to answer that question with their feet. Somewhere down the road, another wagon is already sitting, loaded with the same benches, hitched and waiting for Monday, when it will roll out of this lane and start counting down the 2 weeks until it does all of this again at a different farm for a different family in a room that hasn't been built as a sanctuary yet either. By then, this house will just be a house again. Breakfast table back where it belongs, rugs back on the floor. No trace left that 150 people once knelt here and heard a hymn written by prisoners nobody in that room ever met. And somewhere in that quiet, ordinary reset is the entire point. A church that leaves no building behind can't be measured by what it looks like from the road. It only shows up when the people do.